Hello, my name is Dr. Dave Webster, and this is part of my ongoing video blog series about the travesty of lack of access to PET-CT in Ontario. This one about my own reality check and a time for change in tactics. So last Monday was a fairly typical day for me, a full day assisting in the operating room and full coverage of the nuclear medicine department. So by 10:30 p.m., exhausted and hungry, but still not caught up, I finally headed for dinner at a local bar. Now, keeping in mind the kind of hours, I keep trying to imagine where I can still find 7 hours in my week to, for example, make the video Ms. Elliott, but in the end, only 27 people have watched it, and most likely they're just the government and Cancer Cure Ontario officials who are monitoring my actions. But at the bar, I met a couple of OR scrub nurses who felt comfortable enough to say they'd really been trying to follow my various posts and videos, but even they as nurses couldn't really understand or follow what I was trying to say, and had ultimately given up. Not exactly what I wanted to hear at the end of a hard day's work, but it's a message I needed to hear and then make some changes. So the conversation then turned to the insurmountable problem I have failed to solve for all these years. I spoke about a person I know and people who are familiar with the healthcare situation in all the African countries, and they stated that they are completely unaware of any political regime or politician that has directed their own medical experts to do whatever was necessary to discredit, delay, and block their patients from world standards of care. So I finally realized that the most remarkable achievement of Ontario's political parties is that they have not only convinced Ontario citizens that they are living in a model public health care system, but indeed the rest of the world. And as an example, Mr. Bernie Sanders, the U.S. presidential candidate and biggest supporter of public health care in the U.S., had a wonderful meeting with Ms. Wynne, and he simply couldn't say enough about what the Liberals had done for public health care as a model. In reality, of course, what the Liberals and the other political parties have perpetrated on our patients has been described as unconscionable and an egregious travesty, and I witnessed the impact on patients on a daily basis. Now, they've accomplished this by shamelessly allowing their medical experts to perform experiments on some of our sickest and most distressed patients that have officially been condemned as unethical and bordering on immoral. The opposition, in return, just turns a blind eye to what they're doing to our patients. Now, you won't need to be told that the linchpin to pull off this accomplishment is the professionals that every political regime that has ever targeted groups in their population for, we'll say, special attention have relied on to get away with the terrible things that history has documented. In the bad guy countries, we call them propagandists, but here in North America, we're more polite and call them free press journalists. Yet, ultimately, my colleagues, patients, and those aware of the realities don't care, or at least they don't care enough to do something concrete to try and bring about changes, such as writing the members of Parliament challenging Cancer Cure Ontario, or those so-called watchdogs against political actions, the Ombudsman's office. I've dealt with 5 ombudsmen. They have dismissed absolutely every concern that has been raised. They've buried their investigations from the public and publicly congratulated the government on what a great job they're doing on PET. I've tried writing short letters that people could send to key players, but not aware that those have ever been used. So then we tossed around some ideas about how to motivate people to take action, since without their efforts, we will remain where we are as the last place in the world amongst advanced medical jurisdictions, or possibly worse. So I, in a 2004 letter to then Minister of Health George Smitherman, Dr. Al Dreger, the most senior member of the PET Steering Committee, commented that even then in 2004, Ontario was already a decade behind the rest of the world. Dr. Dreger ultimately was fed up, resigned in disgust, and stated that what they were doing, the government was doing, was bordering on immoral. Yet, in spite of this rather remarkable claim, there's been nothing but a unanimous yawn in response. So, there you have it. People still choose to believe they are lucky to live in Ontario if they get seriously ill, but the truth is that this is a deliberate and elaborately constructed and very cruel lie. If you want access to 2019 levels of medical care, you really have no choice but to leave Ontario. The fact is that at least when it comes to specific healthcare policies, Ontario's politicians make the despot politicians and Banana Republic politicians look like the good guys. So I'm going to change my approach, and I will be looking for people's feedback. And in my more delusional moments, I imagine that finally something will click, and the citizens of Ontario will finally demand that our politicians carry out agendas that aren't tailored to please their political allies, but actually the average Ontario resident, and end what is clearly an assault on our patients and the physicians who try to advocate for them. So Ms. Elliott and Dr. Devlin and the PCs will continue to advance their healthcare agenda using their medical experts in collusion with McMaster University, which shamelessly has sacrificed any attempts to uphold any academic standards in return for our tax dollars. And of course, Ontario's patients will remain the big losers here. Now, given Ms. Elliott's outright dismissal of the nightmare death experience of a patient, which based on policies that she fully supports, my guess is that she and Dr. Devlin will put their own signature on the process of making critical healthcare policy decisions that affect you and your loved ones, not based on the methods of science, but based on their own political agenda. And in doing so, they're going to set new lows for Ontario's patients. And that's the situation. This is my website and political, or my various blog sites and so on. So give me some feedback, hopefully, on my new approach. Thanks for listening.